The cold bit through Maylene's thin jacket as she stood across the street from Golden Harmony Cafe. Her stomach had been empty since yesterday morning. The cafe windows glowed with warm light, showing people inside laughing, eating, and enjoying hot drinks. She had been watching this place for 3 days now, gathering her courage. Maylene wasn't just any hungry 16-year-old. Her slender fingers, now red from the cold, held a gift that had once filled concert halls. But no one here knew that. To them, she was just another struggling teenager in a city that hardly noticed the poor. Today, she whispered to herself, I have to try today. The cafe owner, Mr. Wu, had shooed her away twice before when she lingered too long near the entrance. He wasn't mean about it. His eyes had shown a mix of pity and worry that she might scare away customers. But today she had a plan. She waited until the morning rush slowed, then crossed the street with her heart pounding against her ribs. Through the window she spotted what had first drawn her to this particular cafe, an old upright piano tucked in the corner. It sat mostly unused except when a local music student occasionally played for tips. The bell above the door jingled as she entered, and warm air wrapped around her like a forgotten hug. Several heads turned, some with curious looks, others quickly looking away when they noticed her worn clothes and unwashed hair. Mr. Wu appeared from behind the counter, recognition crossing his face. Young lady, I've told you, please, Maylene said, her voice stronger than she felt. I'm not here to beg. I want to offer something. Mr. Wu paused, confusion replacing his stern expression. He was a middle-aged man with laugh lines around his eyes that suggested kindness beneath his business-like manner. I can play, she said, pointing to the piano. I can play for your customers. And in return, she swallowed her pride. In return, maybe just some soup? Or whatever you might throw away at the end of the day? A woman at a nearby table looked up from her laptop, now listening openly. Mr. Wu crossed his arms, studying Maylene's face. That piano is for professionals or students who book ahead. It's not a toy. I know it's not a toy, Maylene said softly. Please, one song. If you don't like it, I'll leave and never bother you again. The cafe had grown quiet. Mr. Wu sighed and glanced at the curious faces of his customers. One song, he said finally. But if you just bang on the keys, I won't, Maylene promised, already moving toward the piano before he could change his mind. The bench creaked as she sat down. The piano was nothing like the magnificent Steinway that once graced her family's living room, but it had been cared for. She lifted the cover gently, revealing keys that had known thousands of fingers before hers. For a moment, Maylene froze. It had been nearly 8 months since she'd touched a piano. What if her fingers had forgotten? What if the music had left her along with everything else? She took a deep breath and placed her hands on the keys. The first notes of Debussy's Clair de Lune floated through the cafe. She had chosen it carefully, beautiful but not too showy. Her fingers remembered every note, every subtle change in pressure, every gentle lift. A server stopped mid-step, coffee pot still tilted over a customer's cup. The woman with the laptop slowly closed it. An elderly man by the window put down his newspaper. Maylene closed her eyes, letting the music take her away from hunger and cold and loneliness. She wasn't playing for food anymore. She was playing because this was the language her soul spoke most fluently. When the final notes faded, the cafe remained silent for 3 heartbeats. Then came the applause, first from a young couple in the corner, then spreading throughout the room. Maylene opened her eyes, almost surprised to find herself still sitting in the cafe. Mr. Wu stood nearby, his stern expression replaced by something like wonder. Where did you learn to play like that? He asked. Maylene looked down at her hands. My father taught me. It wasn't a lie, but it wasn't the whole truth either. She couldn't bear to explain how her father had once played for presidents and royalty, how music critics had called him the poet of the piano. That world felt like a dream now, impossible to reach and too painful to remember. Well, Mr. Wu said, clearing his throat, I think we can do better than leftover soup. He gestured to an empty table. Sit. I'll bring you something proper to eat. 20 minutes later, Maylene sat with a bowl of steaming noodle soup, a plate of dumplings, and a cup of hot tea in front of her. She tried not to eat too quickly, though her stomach begged her to hurry. The girl with the magic hands, said a voice. Maylene looked up to see the woman who had been working on her laptop. She was in her 30s with kind eyes and a warm smile. I'm Lily, the woman said. I teach literature at the university. May I join you? Maylin nodded, suddenly shy. That was Debussy, wasn't it? Lily asked as she sat down. Played beautifully. Thank you, Maylin replied softly. Where are you staying? Lily asked, then seeing Maylin's hesitation added, I'm sorry, that's too personal. A girl with your talent. It's complicated, Maylin said, focusing on her soup. The afternoon passed in a blur. Mr. Wu allowed her to stay as long as she wanted. When the after-work crowd began filling the cafe, he approached her again. Would you play something else? He asked. The customers liked it. If you're willing, you could come regularly. I can't pay much, but there would always be a meal. And maybe we could work something out. Hope flickered in Maylin's chest for the first time in months. Over the next few weeks, the cafe became Maylin's sanctuary. She played for an hour in the morning and another hour during the evening rush. Mr. Wu cleared out a small storage room upstairs where she could sleep. It wasn't much, just enough space for a folding cot and her few belongings. But it was safe and warm. Regular customers began to arrive specifically during her performance times. Some left tips in a jar Mr. Wu had placed on top of the piano. Maylin saved every coin, dreaming of finding a real place to live, maybe even returning to school. She was careful about what she played, nothing too advanced that might raise questions about her training. Still, she couldn't help adding small flourishes and interpretations that spoke of a deeper musical understanding than most cafe pianists possessed. One afternoon, as rain tapped against the windows, the cafe door opened to admit an elderly man. He walked with a cane and had the careful movements of someone managing chronic pain. The servers greeted him by name, Mr. Zhang, a daily visitor who always ordered the same thing, jasmine tea and almond cookies. Maylin was playing a simplified version of a Chopin nocturne. She noticed Mr. Zhang pause when he heard the music, his head tilting slightly as if listening more intently. He took his usual seat by the window but kept glancing her way. When she finished, he applauded along with the others, but there was something different in his expression. Not just appreciation, but recognition. After her set, as Maylin was helping wipe down tables, she insisted on earning her keep beyond just playing. Mr. Zhang approached her. Young lady, he said, his voice gentle but clear. That was lovely. But I'm curious, why do you simplify the arpeggios in the middle section? The original has such a beautiful flow. Maylin nearly dropped her cloth. Most people wouldn't have noticed the difference. Most people wouldn't even know the original well enough to compare. It's easier that way, she said carefully. Easier, perhaps, but not better. His eyes twinkled. And someone with your obvious talent shouldn't need the easier version. You know music, she said, a statement rather than a question. I was a music professor long ago, he replied. Now I'm just an old man who enjoys his tea and memories. But I still know the difference between someone who plays notes and someone who makes music. He paused. You're the latter. A lump formed in Maylin's throat. For months she'd been hiding not just her identity, but her true abilities. Playing simpler pieces, holding back, trying not to stand out too much while still playing well enough to keep her place at the cafe. Thank you, she said finally. No need for thanks when I'm simply stating facts, Mr. Zhang replied. But I would love to hear you play without holding back sometime. I think we'd all be better for the experience. As he returned to his table, Maylin felt something stir inside her. Pride, perhaps, or the rekindling of a passion she'd tried to suppress. The music that had been her family's legacy for generations wasn't just something she did. It was who she was. That night, lying on her cot in the storage room, Maylin stared at the ceiling and allowed herself, just for a moment, to remember. Her father's hands guiding hers on the keys, her mother's voice singing along softly, the grand piano that had been the heart of their home, the name that had once opened doors throughout the music world. Tomorrow, she decided she would play something more challenging. Not to show off, but because the music deserved to be played as it was written, because despite everything she had lost, this one thing remained, the music that flowed through her veins as surely as her family's legacy. 3 years earlier, Maylin's life had been unrecognizable from the one she lived now. The Chen family home sat on a hill overlooking the city, its wide windows letting in streams of morning light that danced across polished wooden floors. 16-year-old Maylin sat at the grand Steinway piano in the center of their living room, her father standing beside her, gently correcting her hand position. "Feel the music, not just the notes," Jin Chen said, his voice patient but firm. "The difference between a pianist and an artist is that one plays what's written, while the other reveals what's hidden beneath." Jin Chen wasn't just any piano teacher. His face had graced magazine covers, his concerts sold out months in advance, and critics called him the most poetic interpreter of Chopin in a generation. The Chen name had been musical royalty for 3 generations, starting with Mei Lin's grandfather, the renowned composer Wei Chen. From the kitchen came the smell of her mother's cooking and the soft sound of her humming. Wei Chen had been a promising violinist before choosing to support her husband's career and raise their daughter. Their home was always filled with music, recordings, practice sessions, or impromptu duets between father and daughter. "Again," Jin said. "But this time close your eyes. Let your fingers see for you." Mei Lin obeyed, beginning the Rachmaninoff prelude once more. She felt rather than saw her father's approving nod, as the music flowed more naturally this time. Their life wasn't perfect. Her father traveled frequently for concerts, sometimes gone for weeks at a time. But when he returned, he brought stories of grand concert halls and famous musicians, along with small gifts from around the world that Mei Lin treasured. None of them saw the fall coming until they were already in free fall. It began with whispers. Mei Lin noticed her parents having hushed conversations that stopped when she entered the room. Her father spent more time on phone calls, his voice tight with worry. Her mother's smile became strained. Then came the first real sign. Her father canceled a European tour, citing health concerns. Mei Lin had overheard him arguing with his manager late one night. "It's nothing serious," Jin insisted the next morning at breakfast when she asked about it. "Just some inflammation in my hands. The doctor says rest is best." But weeks passed and he didn't return to his practice schedule. Instead, he spent hours in his study with financial advisors and lawyers. The hushed conversations between her parents grew more frequent. One night, Mei Lin woke to the sound of her father playing downstairs. The music was haunting. Chopin's Nocturne in C minor, played with such raw emotion that she crept down to listen from the hallway. She found her father hunched over the piano, tears streaming down his face. His hands moved across the keys with the same technical brilliance as always, but there was something new in his playing, a grief she didn't understand. He saw her when he finished. "Mei Lin," he said softly, "I'm sorry if I woke you. Is everything okay, Dad?" He gestured for her to join him on the bench. "Do you remember what I always tell you about music?" "That it's the language of emotions too complex for words," she answered. "Yes." He touched the keys gently. "Sometimes playing is the only way I know how to process what I'm feeling." "What are you feeling?" she dared to ask. He was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. "Fear," he finally said, "and regret." The next day, strange men in suits came to the house. They walked through every room, making notes and speaking in low voices. Mei Lin watched from her bedroom as her mother wiped away tears in the garden. That night, her parents sat her down and explained what was happening. Her father's investment manager had been arrested for fraud. Most of their savings were gone. "But your career," Mei Lin began. Jin Chen looked down at his hands. "I haven't been entirely honest with you, sweetheart. These hands, the pain has been getting worse. The doctors say it's early onset rheumatoid arthritis. They can treat it, but you won't play professionally again," her mother finished, her voice breaking. The next months brought a cascade of losses. First, her father's grand piano was sold to pay debts. Mei Lin cried as they wheeled it out of the house, feeling like a family member was being taken away. Then came the for sale sign in front of their home. Her mother took a job teaching violin at a local school, coming home exhausted each evening. Her father's health deteriorated as the stress mounted. The medications for his arthritis were expensive, and without health insurance from his management company, they struggled to afford them. They moved to a small apartment across town. Mei Lin transferred to a public school where no one knew about her family's former prominence. She tried to hold on to normalcy, practicing on the school's old upright piano during lunch breaks, pretending not to notice when her mother skipped meals or when bill notices piled up by the door. Then came the night her father collapsed. The ambulance lights flashed red and blue across the apartment walls as paramedics rushed him to the hospital. Pneumonia, complicated by his weakened immune system from the arthritis medications. Maylin sat in the cold hospital waiting room, watching her mother fill out forms, shaking her head at questions about insurance. For 3 weeks, Jin Chen fought for his life. Maylin visited every day after school, doing homework beside his bed, sometimes playing piano pieces on her lap so he could correct her fingering like old times. On good days, he told her stories about his own teacher, about her grandfather's compositions, about the legacy of music that ran in their blood. "Promise me," he said during one of his more lucid moments. "Promise me you won't give up the piano." "No matter what, I promise," she whispered. Holding his thin hand, he died on a Tuesday morning. Maylin was at school when it happened. She would always remember the principal coming to her classroom, the walk to the office where her mother waited with red-rimmed eyes, the drive to the hospital in silence. They couldn't afford a proper funeral. Her father was cremated, his ashes scattered in the botanical garden where he had proposed to her mother 20 years earlier. A few former colleagues came, awkwardly offering condolences and vague promises of help that never materialized. The creditors came within weeks. The apartment had been in her father's name, and without his income they couldn't keep up with payments. Her mother, already fragile from grief, broke down completely. Some mornings she couldn't get out of bed. She lost her teaching position after missing too many days of work. Maylin tried to hold things together. She found a weekend job at a convenience store, hiding her age to get hired. She cooked simple meals, paid what bills she could, and tried to coax her mother back to the world of the living. But it wasn't enough. On her 16th birthday, they were evicted. They moved into a women's shelter across town. Her mother, once elegant and confident, became a ghost of herself, barely speaking, often staring into space for hours. The doctor at the free clinic called it severe depression and gave them prescriptions they couldn't afford to fill. Maylin missed school to look after her mother. Eventually, the school sent notices, then stopped sending them altogether. The shelter had a 30-day limit. When their time was up, Maylin found a cheaper place, a room in a rundown boarding house where the landlord didn't ask questions about the quiet woman who rarely left her bed. For 3 months, they survived this way. Maylin worked whatever odd job she could find, often going hungry so her mother could eat. She'd sneak into the community center to use their piano, her only connection to the life they'd lost and the promise she'd made to her father. When the landlord raised the rent without warning, they couldn't pay. Once again, they found themselves with nowhere to go. This time, her mother refused to go back to the shelter. "You go," she said, the most words she'd spoken in weeks. "I'll stay with Mrs. Wang." Mrs. Wang was an elderly neighbor who had shown them kindness. Maylin didn't want to be separated, but her mother insisted. "It's just temporary," she promised. "Until I'm better." That was 4 months ago. Maylin visited when she could, bringing what little money she earned from various jobs. Mrs. Wang reported that her mother was slowly improving, sometimes even helping with cooking. It gave Maylin hope, but also freedom to focus on survival without constant worry. She had slept in parks, in the back rooms of businesses where sympathetic owners looked the other way, and once in the hospital waiting room, pretending to be waiting for a patient. She'd washed in public restrooms and kept her few possessions in a backpack she never let out of her sight. And then she'd found Golden Harmony Cafe, with its piano in the corner. As she lay on her cot in the storage room above the cafe, Maylin thought about how far she had fallen, from a home with a grand piano to playing for food, from private schools to no school at all, from a family with a legacy to a girl no one knew. But Mr. Zhang had recognized something in her playing. Not her name or her past, but her gift. The music that flowed through generations of Chen musicians couldn't be taken by creditors or erased by poverty. Tomorrow, she would play without holding back. Tomorrow, she would honor her promise to her father. The Chen musical legacy might be hidden, but it wasn't gone. Not as long as her fingers could find their way to piano keys. And maybe, just maybe, if she could find stability here, she could bring her mother back into her life, help her heal, and somehow rebuild from the ashes of what they had lost. The morning light filtered through the small window of Maylin's storage room. She had been awake for hours, her conversation with Mr. Zhang replaying in her mind. Today would be different. Today she would stop hiding. She carefully smoothed her only nice shirt, a button-up she'd managed to keep from her old life, and pulled her hair into a neat bun. The face in the cracked mirror above the sink looked older than 16, with eyes that had seen too much loss. Downstairs, the cafe was coming to life. The smell of fresh bread and coffee drifted up the narrow staircase as Mr. Wu and his wife prepared for the morning rush. Mei Lin had come to love this rhythm, the clatter of dishes, the hiss of the espresso machine, the bell above the door announcing each new customer. "Good morning," Mr. Wu called as she descended. "You're up early." "I couldn't sleep," she admitted. "I was thinking about the music." Mr. Wu nodded, his hands busy folding napkins. In the month since she'd started playing at Golden Harmony, he had become something like a guardian to her. He never asked about her past, but he made sure she ate 3 meals a day and sometimes slipped extra money into her tip jar when business was slow. "Mr. Zhang will be here at 10, he said. He asked specifically when you would be playing today. Mei Lin felt a flutter of nervousness. "I'm going to play something different." "Different?" "More challenging, more—" She searched for the right word. "True." Mr. Wu gave her a curious look but didn't press. "Well, the customers come for you now, not just my wife's almond cookies. Whatever you play, they'll love it." The morning passed in a blur of routine. Mei Lin helped wipe down tables and fill salt shakers, watching the clock. At precisely 10, Mr. Zhang arrived, leaning on his cane. He nodded at her with a knowing smile as he took his usual seat by the window. At 10:30, Mei Lin sat at the piano. Usually she started with something light, a folk song or a simplified classical piece. But today her fingers hovered over the keys with new purpose. She began to play Chopin's Ballade No. 1 in G minor, one of her father's signature pieces. It started simply enough, but soon built into cascades of notes that required not just technical skill, but emotional depth. She had never played anything this complex at the cafe before. The usual chatter died down as customers realized something extraordinary was happening. Mei Lin closed her eyes, letting her fingers find their way across the familiar landscape of the piece. This was her father's music, her grandfather's legacy. This was who she really was. When she reached the thundering conclusion, the cafe erupted in applause. Mei Lin opened her eyes to see people standing, their faces showing amazement. Mr. Wu stood in the doorway to the kitchen, a dish towel frozen in his hands, but it was Mr. Zhang's reaction she sought. The elderly man sat perfectly still, his teacup halfway to his lips. Even from across the room, she could see the tears in his eyes. After her performance, customers approached to praise her, dropping generous tips into the jar. Several asked where she had studied. Questions she deflected with vague answers about private lessons. Finally, the crowd dispersed and Mr. Zhang made his way to the piano. "May I?" he asked, gesturing to the bench beside her. Mei Lin nodded, making room for him. "That was Jin Chen's interpretation of the ballade," he said quietly. Not a question, but a statement. Mei Lin's heart stopped. "You knew my father?" Mr. Zhang smiled sadly. "I was a music critic for 30 years. I reviewed your father's first major concert. I followed his career until—" He hesitated. "Until his health forced him to stop performing." "You know who I am," Mei Lin whispered. "I suspected yesterday. Today I was certain. Your technique, the way you shape a phrase, it's in your blood." He studied her face. "But what I don't understand is why Jin Chen's daughter is playing for tips in a cafe when she should be at the conservatory." The story poured out of her then. Her father's illness, the financial ruin, his death, her mother's depression, and their separation. Mr. Zhang listened without interruption, his face growing graver with each detail. "And your mother? Where is she now?" he asked when Mei Lin finished. "Staying with a neighbor from our old building. She's fragile. I visit when I can, but it's hard." Tears threatened, but Mei Lin blinked them away. She had cried enough in the past year. Mr. Zhang was quiet for a long moment, his fingers resting lightly on the keys without pressing them. "Your father was one of the greatest pianists of his generation," he finally said. "When he played, you could hear his soul in every note. Today I heard that same quality in you." "Thank you," Mei Lin said softly. "No, child. Thank you for preserving something beautiful in this often ugly world." He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a business card. "I have a friend at the Central City Conservatory. She runs the scholarship program. Will you let me arrange an audition?" Mei Lin stared at the card. The Central City Conservatory was prestigious, a place for serious musicians with serious futures. "I don't have a high school diploma," she said. "I haven't practiced properly in almost a year." I don't even have decent clothes for an audition. None of that matters when you have a gift like yours, Mr. Zhang insisted. At least consider it. Before she could respond, Mr. Wu called her name. A delivery had arrived and he needed help unpacking boxes. Mei Lin tucked the card into her pocket, promising Mr. Zhang she would think about it. That evening, after the cafe closed, Mr. Wu surprised her. I heard your conversation with Mr. Zhang, he admitted as they cleaned the last tables. He's right, you know. You don't belong here. Mei Lin felt a pang of hurt. I thought, No, Mr. Wu interrupted, seeing her expression. I don't mean it like that. You'll always have a place here if you need it, but a talent like yours, it's like keeping a rare bird in a small cage. It's not right. He pulled an envelope from his apron pocket. The staff and we've been talking. This is for you, for proper clothes for your audition, for whatever you need. Inside was more money than Mei Lin had seen in months. Tips saved by the staff, contributions from regular customers who had heard about the possible audition. I can't accept this, she protested. You can and you will, Mr. Wu said firmly. Consider it an investment. When you're famous, you'll mention the cafe where you got your start. That night, lying on her cot, Mei Lin made a decision. She would audition, but first she needed to see her mother. The next morning, she took a bus to her old neighborhood. Mrs. Wang answered the door of her small apartment with a surprised smile. Mei Lin, your mother will be so happy. She's having a good day today. Hui Chen sat by the window, a book open in her lap. She looked up when Mei Lin entered, and for a moment, there was a flash of the woman she used to be. Elegant, perceptive, loving. My little songbird, she said, opening her arms. Mei Lin fell into her mother's embrace. Suddenly a child again despite all she had been through. They talked for hours, really talked for the first time since her father's death. Mei Lin told her about the cafe, about Mr. Zhang, about the possible audition. You must do it, her mother said, more animated than Mei Lin had seen her in months. Your father would want it. I want it, but what about you? I can't leave you. Her mother took Mei Lin's hands in hers. For too long I've been lost in my grief, letting you carry burdens no child should bear. But seeing you now, hearing about this opportunity, it's woken something in me. I need to be your mother again, not your responsibility. She revealed that she had recently started seeing a counselor at a community health center. Mrs. Wang's daughter worked there and had arranged it. She was also taking medication for her depression, paid for by a program for artists in need that Mrs. Wang had helped her apply for. I'm not well yet, she admitted, but I'm trying. And seeing you follow your father's path would give me strength. Before Mei Lin left, her mother disappeared into the bedroom and returned with a small wooden box. This was your father's, she said, opening it to reveal a pair of gold cufflinks shaped like tiny pianos. He wore them at his first major performance. I want you to have them. Not to wear, of course, but as a reminder of who you are. Mei Lin clutched the box to her chest. I'll make him proud, she promised. I'll make both of you proud. The audition was scheduled for the following week. Mr. Wu gave Mei Lin time off to practice, letting her use the cafe piano during closed hours. Mr. Zhang came daily to coach her, his instruction gentle but precise. You have the technique, he told her. What you need now is confidence. The night before the audition, the cafe held a special event, a preview performance by Mei Lin. Regular customers packed the small space, along with some of Mr. Zhang's contacts from the music world. Even her mother came, supported by Mrs. Wang. Sitting proudly in the front row, Mei Lin played her audition program, Bach, Chopin, and one of her grandfather's compositions that few people would recognize. The audience listened in reverent silence, then erupted in applause that seemed too big for the small cafe. Afterward, a tall woman with silver hair approached. She had a regal bearing that immediately commanded attention. Mr. Zhang has told me about you, she said, extending her hand. I'm Professor Lin from the conservatory. After what I've heard tonight, I'm looking forward to your audition tomorrow, Miss Chen. As Mei Lin shook the professor's hand, she felt something shift inside her, fear giving way to determination. For the first time since her father's death, the future held more promise than pain. Whatever happened at the audition, she had reclaimed a part of herself she thought was lost forever. That night, as the cafe emptied and her mother returned to Mrs. Wang's apartment with promises to see her tomorrow, Mei Lin sat alone at the piano, She played her father's favorite nocturne, feeling his presence in every note. "I'm ready," she whispered to the empty room, to her father's memory, to herself. The Central City Conservatory stood like a palace of music, its stone steps worn smooth by generations of aspiring artists. Maylin gripped the handle of her mother's old handbag, inside which lay her father's cufflinks, a talisman of courage for what lay ahead. Mr. Zhang waited at the bottom of the steps, leaning on his cane. He had insisted on accompanying her, though Maylin had assured him she could find her way alone. "This is a big day," he said simply. "No one should face big days alone." The entrance hall echoed with distant music, a violin somewhere, a soprano voice floating down from upper floors, the thunder of a timpani. Students rushed past, instrument cases in hand, lost in their own musical worlds. Professor Lin met them outside the audition room. Up close, she was even more intimidating, tall and elegant, with piercing eyes that seemed to look straight through Maylin's carefully chosen outfit to the nervous girl beneath. "We don't usually hold auditions mid-semester," she said, her voice clipped and professional. "Mr. Zhang has called in quite a few favors on your behalf." Maylin glanced at Mr. Zhang, who gave her an encouraging nod. "I'm grateful for the opportunity," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. "Gratitude is nice. Talent is better." Professor Lin opened the door to reveal a large room with a magnificent grand piano at its center. "The committee is waiting." 5 people sat in a semicircle of chairs, 3 men and 2 women, all with the sharp, assessing eyes of people who had heard thousands of hopeful musicians and were rarely impressed. "This is Maylin Chen," Professor Lin announced, then added with subtle emphasis, "daughter of Jin Chen." A murmur went through the committee. One older man with thick glasses leaned forward, studying her face. "Jin Chen's daughter? The Jin Chen who played Carnegie Hall?" Maylin nodded, her throat suddenly dry. "Well," said a woman with short gray hair, "let's see if talent runs in the family. Whenever you're ready, Miss Chen." Mr. Zhang squeezed her hand and joined the committee. Professor Lin gestured to the piano. The instrument was far finer than the upright at the cafe, a concert grand with the lid fully open, its black surface gleaming under the lights. Maylin approached it with reverence, adjusting the bench, taking a moment to feel the weight of the keys. She began with Bach, the Prelude and Fugue in C minor, a piece that demanded technical precision and emotional clarity. The notes filled the room, bouncing off the high ceiling and surrounding her like old friends. She felt the committee watching, analyzing, judging, but as the music took over, their presence faded. Next came Chopin, her father's beloved composer. She had chosen his Ballade No. 4, a piece that told a story of its own, moving from quiet reflection to passionate outbursts. As her fingers danced across the keys, Maylin thought of her father's hands guiding hers, his voice gentle in her ear. Music is not in the notes, but in the silence between them. For her final piece, she had debated for days. Mr. Zhang had suggested a showpiece, Liszt or Rachmaninoff, something to display technical brilliance. But in the end, she chose one of her grandfather's compositions, a piece rarely performed outside of China. "This is Moonlight on the River," she announced quietly. "Composed by Wei Chen." The piece began softly, like ripples on water, then built gradually into flowing passages that mimicked the course of a river from mountain stream to mighty current. It was music that told the story of her homeland, her family, her journey. As she played the final delicate notes, tears pricked behind her eyelids, but she blinked them away. This was no time for tears. Silence filled the room when she finished. The committee members exchanged glances. Then the woman with gray hair spoke. "Miss Chen, could you please wait outside while we deliberate?" Maylin nodded and rose from the bench. Mr. Zhang joined her in the hallway, where they sat on a wooden bench beneath a portrait of some long-dead composer. "You played beautifully," he assured her. "I made mistakes in the Bach," she said, picking at a thread on her skirt, "and the Chopin was faster than I intended." They didn't notice those things. They noticed your musicality, your heart. 20 minutes later, Professor Lin called them back in. The committee sat just as before, their faces unreadable. The older man with thick glasses spoke first. "Miss Chen, your technique shows both natural talent and excellent training, though with some understandable rough edges given your circumstances. Mei Lin held her breath. However, the gray-haired woman continued, what cannot be taught is musical intuition, the ability to find the soul of a piece and bring it to life. That you have in abundance, Professor Lin stepped forward. The committee has decided to offer you a place at the conservatory with a full scholarship, including housing and a small stipend for living expenses. The words took a moment to sink in. When they did, Mei Lin felt her knees weaken slightly. There are conditions, Professor Lin added. You'll need to complete your general education requirements alongside your musical training. Your schedule will be more demanding than that of other students, and you'll be expected to maintain the highest standards in all your classes. I understand, Mei Lin said, her voice barely above a whisper. Thank you. Thank you all. Don't thank us yet, Professor Lin said, though her stern expression had softened slightly. The real work begins now. Outside in the bright afternoon sunshine, Mei Lin finally let her tears fall, tears of relief, of joy, of disbelief. Mr. Zhang patted her shoulder awkwardly. Your father would be proud, he said. Very proud indeed. The next weeks passed in a whirlwind. There were forms to fill out, tests to take to determine her academic placement, a small dormitory room to move into. Mr. Wu and the cafe staff threw her a farewell party, with Mr. Wu gruffly telling her that her spot at the piano would always be waiting if she wanted to come back and play. The biggest change came in her mother. Learning of Mei Lin's acceptance seemed to ignite something in Hui Chen. With Mrs. Wang's help, she found a small apartment near the conservatory and a part-time job teaching beginner violin lessons at a community center. I can't promise I won't have bad days, she told Mei Lin as they set up their tiny new home together. But I want to be here for you now, the way I should have been all along. The fall semester began with the intensity Mei Lin had never experienced. Mornings filled with music theory and history, afternoons with practice sessions, evenings with academic catch-up courses. Her fingers developed calluses. Her mind stretched to absorb new concepts. Her body ached from hours at the piano. Professor Lin had become her primary instructor and proved to be as demanding as she was knowledgeable. Again, she would say, no matter how well Mei Lin played a passage. Again, but this time listen to what the music is telling you. Other students were curious about her, the girl who had arrived mid-semester with a scholarship and a famous father. Some were friendly, others competitive. A few whispered about her when they thought she couldn't hear, about her second-hand clothes, her unusual path to the conservatory, the rumors of her playing for food in a cafe. Mei Lin ignored the whispers and focused on her work. Every evening she called her mother, who was slowly finding her way back to herself. On weekends they would have dinner with Mr. Zhang, who had become something of a grandfather figure to Mei Lin. Sometimes Mr. Wu and his wife would join them, bringing treats from the cafe. 3 months into her studies, Professor Lin entered the practice room where Mei Lin was working on a particularly challenging Beethoven sonata. There's someone here to see you, she said. Her usual crisp tone tinged with something Mei Lin couldn't identify. A woman stood in the doorway, elegantly dressed with an air of quiet confidence. Mei Lin didn't recognize her until she smiled. Lily, she gasped. It was Lily from the cafe, the literature professor who had often worked on her laptop while Mei Lin played. I heard you were here, Lily said, but I'm not here as just a fan. I'm here in a professional capacity. She handed Mei Lin a business card. I'm also an editor at Central City Press. We're putting together a book on musical prodigies who overcame adversity, and your story, well, it's extraordinary. Mei Lin looked at the card in confusion. My story? A young pianist from a legendary musical family, fallen on hard times playing for food in a cafe, then rediscovered and accepted to the conservatory? It's inspirational. How do you even know all that? Lily smiled. Mr. Zhang may have mentioned a few details, and a video of you playing at Golden Harmony has been making the rounds online. A video? Professor Lin cleared her throat. One of our board members was at your preview performance the night before your audition. He took a video and shared it with colleagues. It's garnered quite a bit of attention in certain circles. Mei Lin felt a flush of embarrassment mixed with surprise. I had no idea. There's more, Lily said. The publisher is also interested in releasing a recording of your grandfather's compositions. Mr. Zhang mentioned you have access to some unpublished works. It was true. Among the few possessions they'd managed to keep was a folder of her grandfather's handwritten scores, pieces he had composed but never published. "They're at my mother's apartment," Maylin said slowly. "But I don't know if they're good enough for recording." "From what I've heard of Moonlight on the River, they absolutely are," Lily assured her. "This could be a chance to preserve your family's legacy and introduce your grandfather's music to a new generation." That night, Maylin sat at the window of her dormitory room, looking out at the city lights. 6 months ago, she had been homeless, playing a worn cafe piano for meals. Now she was discussing recording contracts and book features. Her phone buzzed with a text from her mother. "Just heard the news from Mr. Zhang. Your grandfather would be so proud to have his music live on through you." Maylin thought about legacy. Not just the burden of living up to a famous name, but the gift of carrying forward something beautiful. The Chen musical tradition hadn't ended with her father's illness or death. It hadn't been lost when they sold the grand piano or left their home. It had been inside her all along, waiting for the right moment to emerge. As winter settled over the city, Maylin found herself at the center of a small but growing buzz in the classical music world. "Cafe pianist revealed as prodigy," read one headline in a local arts paper. Her professors noted her progress with approval, though Professor Lin was careful to keep her grounded. "Talent and a good story will open doors," she told Maylin after a particularly successful recital, "but it's discipline and heart that will keep them open." Remember that. Maylin did remember. Every time her fingers touched the keys, every time she opened one of her grandfather's scores, every time she called her mother or visited Golden Harmony Cafe. This second chance wasn't just for her. It was for all of them. For the legacy that had almost been lost but was now finding new life. 5 years had passed since that first audition at the Central City Conservatory. 5 years of early mornings and late nights, of calloused fingers and aching shoulders, of theory exams and recitals. 5 years of growth, both as a musician and as a person. Maylin stood backstage at Carnegie Hall, her heart racing as she listened to the rustle of the audience settling into their seats. Her concert dress, midnight blue with subtle silver embroidery, had been a gift from Professor Lin, who now stood beside her, making last-minute adjustments to Maylin's hair. "Remember to breathe," Professor Lin said, her usual stern tone softened by pride. "The music knows what to do. Just let it flow through you." In the 5 years since discovering Maylin playing for food at Golden Harmony Cafe, Professor Lin had become more than a teacher. She was a mentor, a guide, sometimes even a friend. She had pushed Maylin harder than any other student, accepting nothing less than excellence. But she had also fought for opportunities that most young pianists could only dream of. Like tonight, playing at Carnegie Hall, the same stage where her father had received standing ovations, where the greatest musicians in the world had performed. If someone had told Maylin this would happen when she was sleeping in park benches and washing in public bathrooms, she would have thought they were cruel to even suggest such an impossible dream. Yet here she was. 5 minutes, called the stage manager. Maylin took a deep breath and reached into her small clutch purse, pulling out her father's gold piano cufflinks. She ran her finger over their smooth surface, a ritual before every important performance. "He's with you tonight," came a gentle voice. Maylin turned to see her mother approaching, elegant in a simple red dress. Hoichen had undergone her own transformation in these 5 years, returning to teaching violin full-time, slowly rebuilding her confidence, even occasionally performing in chamber music groups. The deep depression that had once threatened to consume her had receded, though there were still difficult days. Mother and daughter had learned to face those days together. "I keep thinking about the last time Dad played here," Maylin said. "I was 12. He let me come on stage during the intermission to see how the hall looked from the performer's perspective. I remember," her mother said with a smile. "You stood at the piano for so long they had to usher you off when the audience started returning. I never imagined I'd actually perform here. Your father always knew you would. He said you had something special, not just technique, but soul." The stage manager approached again. "They're ready for you, Miss Chen." Maylin hugged her mother and Professor Lin, then made her way to the stage entrance. As she waited for her cue, she thought about the journey that had led her here. The recording of her grandfather's unpublished works had been released 2 years ago, to critical acclaim, bringing his compositions to international attention. Music scholars had written articles about the Lost Chen compositions, and several major pianists had added them to their repertoires. The book about musical prodigies who overcame adversity had featured her story prominently, leading to interviews and profiles in music magazines. The photo of her playing at Golden Harmony Cafe had become iconic in certain circles. The homeless girl with extraordinary talent, now seen as an inspiration. Mr. Wu had framed that photo and hung it prominently in the cafe, which now attracted music lovers who came hoping to discover the next Mei Lin. He and his wife still insisted on feeding her whenever she visited, though she could now afford to eat anywhere in the city. Mr. Zhang had become her unofficial grandfather, attending every local performance and offering the same gentle guidance he had when she was playing for food. Just yesterday, they had visited her father's memorial site together, placing fresh flowers and telling him about tonight's concert. The announcer's voice broke through her thoughts. "Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to the stage Mei Lin Chen." The applause washed over her as she stepped into the lights. The hall was massive from the audience perspective, but from the stage, it felt strangely intimate. Thousands of faces turned toward her with expectation and excitement. She bowed, then settled at the magnificent Steinway. This concert was special not just because of the venue, but because of the program. Tonight, she would be premiering a newly discovered composition by her grandfather, a concerto he had written but never published, found among old papers in a distant relative's home in China. The conductor raised his baton as Mei Lin placed her hands on the keys. The orchestra began the opening theme, and then it was her turn to enter the musical conversation. Her fingers found the notes with confidence born of hundreds of hours of practice, but also with the freedom that comes from truly understanding a piece of music. Her grandfather's concerto told the story of his homeland, its mountains and rivers, its ancient traditions and modern struggles. But as Mei Lin played, she felt it telling her story too, the heights of privilege, the depths of loss, the slow climb back to grace. The second movement was a tender dialogue between piano and strings, like a conversation between generations. Mei Lin thought of her grandfather, whom she had never met but whose musical DNA flowed in her veins. She thought of her father, whose guidance had shaped her earliest years at the keyboard. And she thought of her own journey, how it had both honored and expanded their legacy. In the final movement, the music built to a powerful climax, piano and orchestra united in a triumphant statement of resilience. As Mei Lin played the final chords, she felt a sense of completion, not just of the piece, but of a chapter in her life. The journey from that desperate girl playing for food to this moment had come full circle. The audience erupted in applause. Mei Lin rose and bowed, then gestured to the orchestra and conductor. As the applause continued, she looked to the wings where her mother stood with tears streaming down her face. Professor Lin was beside her, actually smiling, a rare sight indeed. In the front row sat Mr. Wu and his wife, dressed in their Sunday best, clapping until their hands must have hurt. Beside them was Mr. Zhang, leaning forward on his cane, his eyes shining with pride. And next to him, a group of students from the community music program Mei Lin had helped establish for children who couldn't afford lessons. Her way of passing forward the second chance she had been given. The conductor motioned for her to take another bow as the audience rose to their feet. Standing ovation at Carnegie Hall, just like her father before her. Later, at the reception following the concert, Mei Lin found a quiet moment amidst the congratulations and champagne toasts. She stepped onto a balcony overlooking the city lights, breathing in the cool evening air. A young reporter had followed her, notepad in hand. "Miss Chen," she said eagerly, "everyone wants to know, what's next for you after such a triumphant debut at Carnegie Hall?" Mei Lin smiled. 5 years ago, she had been focused solely on survival, on finding her next meal. Now the world seemed full of possibilities. "I'll continue performing, of course," she said, "but I'm also establishing a foundation in my father's name to support young musicians facing financial hardships. No one with real talent should have to play for food." "Your story has inspired so many people," the reporter,